here's the title of the class, Zerotheism for Kids. Everybody knows who Adam is, right?
Yes.
Okay, in the Bible, one of your questions, Temple, was why did God create man first, right? Okay, so that story comes from 3 different mythologies. It comes from Greek mythology, and it comes from Sumerian mythology, which is where Iraq is, and Egyptian mythology. And we'll explain how this is just a story that got passed along to us, that got changed every time, every 100 years the story got changed. Here's a quick diagram to show where the story of Adam and Eve comes from in the Bible. Specifically in 1654, Bishop James Ussher pronounced that God created earth at nightfall on 22nd October 4004 and then made Adam and Eve 6 days later. This has been passed along over the last 350 years as verbatim. Originally, however, in 500 BC, circa, the 6 authors that wrote the Pentateuch, or Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, merged the 3 main creation of human stories prior to them in the last 3,000 years, namely the Sumerian mythology creation myth of Niniti healing Eniki's rib from 3500 BC, and her ability to create humans by a mixture of blood and clay, together with Hesiod's story of Pandora's box, with a golden apple, a snake, a garden, and the god made Pandora, who was warned not to open the box, or else she would let the evil into the world, from Greek mythology, together with the Egyptian story of the creation of humans from clay on Khnum's potter's wheel from Egyptian mythology. This, everybody knows what this is, right? Noah's Ark. So we're going to explain how this flood story that's found in the Bible comes from the Nile River. And over here, this is what's called the old belief system, and this is what's called the new belief system. So now, instead of thinking that there was a big flood, and then God told Noah to put all the animals on the ark, and that's where humans came from, the newest cosmology is that 13.7 billion years ago, the Earth exploded from a small condensed state and started expanding. And it formed smaller things like photons, electrons, and hydrogen atoms, and sooner or later it formed us.
If the world exploded, why is it still here?
Well, the universe exploded from a small point, so now everything is expanding. So we're in what's called the Milky Way galaxy, and then if you get out your telescope at night, you look out, and you'll see other galaxies. And there's hundreds of different galaxies, and they're all moving apart from each other right now.
So what he's saying is that explosion is what created Earth.
We'll explain that in the slide. So one of your questions, Jacob, was how was God born, right? So this is the new way of understanding things. Instead of thinking that God was born, the only thing we know is that there was an explosion. And out of this explosion came these 2 things, bosons and fermions, which are small, they're particles. There's 4 different kinds of these particles, and there's about 9 different kinds of these particles. So remember, fermions are things you can touch, like fur. And bosons are things you can feel, like light or heat. When we did the ball and ring experiment.
Yeah, but you can't touch it.
So to answer your question, how was God born? Now we think of that what's called energy is the new way of understanding God. But it wasn't that energy was born. Some scientists think that it came out of what's called a quantum vacuum, which means that when you say, you know how when you heat things up, everything starts moving around? Like in the summertime, people are moving around and partying more and going outside more. But then in the wintertime, everybody stays inside and goes in their house. So the scientists think that everything was frozen and got real small, and that but there was a little bit of energy left over called quantum energy, and that's where this Big Bang came from. But nobody really knows all the details, so this is a little bit uncertain what this thing is. This is where Zerotheism comes from. And this is what's called the Critias hypothesis. And so the old days, the Egyptians believed in a whole bunch of different gods. So I'll explain. So right here we've got Thor's god of thunder from Scandinavia, and the head god is called Odin. So Thor's relatives used to believe in this god called Odin. That's right, Thor, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. So people in America, for the most part, believe in this Christian god over here. Now people in Islam, they believe in this god called Allah. So, and then the Jewish people, they live in what's called Canaanite, and they believe in this god called Yahweh. And then the Romans used to believe in this god called Jupiter. And this is what's called, you believe in the 5 different gods, that's what's called polytheism. Theism means God, and poly means more than one, multiple number. So these guys were, in the old days, about 5,000 years ago, everybody was a polytheist. But then they started thinking that every town had a different god. So like if you went to Chicago, they would say, oh, the Chicago god says you can't cross the street at 2 a.m. And then if you went to Milwaukee, they would say, well, the Milwaukee god says you can cross the street anytime you want. So then people would start arguing because there was different gods, and they said, well, this doesn't make sense. So there has to be one god that's everywhere. Mm-hmm.
Why can't you go to sweet and
Well, that's just that's like a made-up story. It's like it's not a real story. It's something I just made up, like Santa Claus, or like the Tooth Fairy. Tooth Fairy is an example of a made-up story. So when you're little, your people who take care of you say that if your tooth falls out, they're going to give you.
Let's choose a different.
Okay, so
let's go Adam and Eve, maybe.
Okay, well, so walking like okay, here's an example. One time I was with my nephews, and I told them that if they were bad, there would be, when they slept at night, if they didn't clean their room, there was a one-eyed teddy bear that would wander in the neighborhood, and he would come through your window and he would steal all your shoes. So I just made that story up when I was babysitting them for one day. So they were scared about the story for like 3 years afterwards, and they would always clean their room.
So it wasn't a true story, but it was effective.
Yeah.
That's really funny.
Yeah.
A
So,
one-eyed teddy bear can't steal all your shoes. It only has smart.
You would have been too smart for
see,
that
yes,
story.
you're smart. So that's what we're trying to teach you, to be free thinkers. So if somebody tells you a story.
They have help with they could take one suit and then put it in a box instead.
Okay, so that's
Or it would be a giant.
So to continue with the story, in the old days, 5,000 years ago, they used to believe in multiple gods, and they were polytheists. But then they started arguing. They said, well, because the laws are the same in each town, like say when we drop the rock here, and it falls through the gravitational force tube, it's going to fall at 9.8 meters per second squared. And it's going to take about 1 second to fall from here to here. And they found that because the laws were the same in Chicago and Milwaukee, there has to be one overpower God governing that law. So then they switched over to monotheism. That happened about 2,000 years ago. So most people in America believe this. They either believe that the universe is made by God, or they believe in spirit, or they believe in life force. So now we're switching over here. We're going to teach you Zerotheism. So now, if you go to, people will go, does anybody know what the best university in America is, or in the world is?
School of Art Institute of Chicago?
No, in the world. Okay, so the #1 school in the world is Harvard. That's where everybody in the whole world wants to go. So 40% of the students that go to Harvard, they believe this belief system, where they believe in Zerotheism, which means they don't believe in God, and they believe in forces and matter. Now, the guy who coined this term, this concept of Zerotheism, you see this guy here, Paul Dirac? Okay, so this is Paul Dirac. And then he was the one that arrived at the view that everything in the universe is made of bosons and fermions. Now, the one thing that Paul Dirac couldn't understand, you see this guy, there's Rosie asked about Heisenberg, right? So there it is right here. So Heisenberg and Dirac were out dancing. They were on a cruise ship going to Japan. And Paul Dirac he was just real scientific. He didn't do anything else. He didn't go out and party, and he didn't hang out with people, and he wasn't really social, but all he did was focus on science. So this guy was more of a partier. And he just proposed, this guy would go out and dance with the flapper girls, which are like the cruise ship women. And Paul Dirac didn't understand why he was dancing. So to be a whole person, you have to understand, if you're a zerotheist, you have to understand not only that everything in the universe is force and matter, but you also understand why people dance. Okay, so who knows what this is? Surfing, okay. Oh, okay, she's just... Okay, so...
That's true, you hear what he said?
Smart. So the moon, this is what a tide is here. The moon and the earth move, and according to the gravitational force, they create the tides. Now, this is Henry Adams here. He's what's called a social Newton. And he says that these waves and tides happen in society. Einstein said that everything in the universe is determinate, like the dominoes. But then Henry Adams says that everything in the universe has its regular waves and tides. So far, when you switch from monotheism, that means believing that God did everything, to switching over to zerotheism, we believe that the universe is force, matter, and then there's waves and tides. And that happens to people surfing and also people going to parties, like having a big party every summer. These are called social Newtons. So this guy right here, that Henry Adams, he's number 2 social Newton right here. That means he takes science and he applies it to sociology. Now, question? Which one? This one? This one? Here, point to it. This one, okay. So this is the old days. People used to, they were called prophets. And people would have, anybody know who Moses is? So this is Moses from the Bible. In the old days, they used to say that he climbed on top of a mountain and he received the 10 commandments from God by going out and he didn't eat for 30 days and he became real lightheaded and he thought that he talked to God and received the laws for a human society.
Does it still happen?
No, it's like like I told you the story about the one-eyed teddy bear and my nephew. So it's kind of like he made up the story, but he also believed it at the same time, because he thought he was trying to figure out how society should be governed. Like how do you know what's right from wrong? Whether you should steal, you should take a pack of bubble gum, or you shouldn't take it. So he made these 10 laws that we should follow. Now the Muslims, they believe that Muhammad was a prophet. They believe that he flew on a flying donkey up through the sky and he received the words from Allah, which is their God. And when he flew, he met all these prophets over here. So in the old days, the prophets used to get their wisdom. This guy is Moses talking to a burning bush. And that's where they got their knowledge from God from. So the new prophets over here are what are called social Newtons. And they get their prophecies by doing experiments. Like when we did the ball and ring experiments.
Can we do that?
We gathered data, and that's where we get our. So instead of talking to burning bushes, we measure things, and then we write down what we found. So what we're teaching you here is called new prophets, and this is one of the prophets called Gilbert Lewis. You see the G right here? This is what's called. You can think of this as God's energy, the G. So whenever you do something good, it's going to have God's energy that has a negative symbol, the arrow pointing to the left. That means there's a decrease in energy. So when you do something wrong, like, when
You steal something?
Yeah, when you steal something, and they used to say that God would curse you. So the new way of understanding that the act of stealing is going to be an increase in gives energy, which is like God's energy. So it makes the society more unstable.
Which is another reason why when you steal something, you're going to feel bad about it.